Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. If we have any new people here, you didn't hear Ali's intro, my name is Jay. I'm a volunteer with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I made Aliyah myself with them over 14 years ago. And here at Cafe Oleh, we try to go over the Hebrew that you use in everyday life that you may or may not be learning in Ulpan. Whether you're in Ulpan, whether you're learning Hebrew else in some other capacity, maybe you're not. We really try to focus on everyday language, just like you would in your respective native language in your respective countries of origin, but the stuff that you need every day for everyday life in Israel. And we really try to keep this as user-friendly as possible, so we're always open to suggestions for topics that are as relevant for all of us, right? So not for your specific doctor or your specific place of residence, but for all of us as Olim. So if you have any specific requests for topics for us to cover, Ali put her email in the chat window. Feel free to email us, and we'd be more than happy to accommodate you. So today, and as you all know, I give you a vocab list. You'll see it. You'll be able to screenshot it. You'll be able to, old school write it down with pen and paper. You'll also get a recording of this. So if you didn't catch any of it, you'll be able to follow that. I want to take us on a rather important topic that came up last week when we were talking about the command form. We were actually reviewing the command form, and it came up in some of the examples of verbs that I gave you. And I went on a little bit of a tangent, but it's still very important, and it's the issue of synonyms. Synonyms, as you all remember from grade school language arts, are words that are similar, if not identical in meaning. Now, English has many, 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 because English vocabulary is one of the largest in the world in terms of spoken languages. English has infinite number of words because English is no longer true to its Germanic origins. It's actually adopted words and even grammar from other languages, particularly other parts of Indo-European languages. So it's not a true Germanic language anymore. It has a lot that it adopted from Greek and Latin, from other Romance languages, from other Indo-European languages. And as a result, English has all sorts of words, whereas Hebrew, which is what we're talking about today, Hebrew has a very conservative number of vocab. Both words that stand on their own, but also what's unique about Hebrew, and you're going to see this in some of the examples today, we can create our own words. Once you understand how Hebrew grammar works, and it's a little too advanced for this class, but you're going to get some insights today about that, you can create almost any word, and 9 times out of 10, a native Hebrew speaker will understand you. But what I want to talk about is synonyms, and the fact that when we're learning a language, and we're just starting to learn a language, no matter our age, we're often taught by the teacher that certain words mean the same thing in English, when in fact they actually don't. We're taught that for a number of reasons. They want us to have a huge amount of vocabulary early on, especially if you're younger. There's a belief that nuance goes over the head of younger students, whatever it may be. Not a lot, but a good number of the words that we're taught when we're first starting to learn Hebrew actually don't mean what we're taught to believe. And that is the same as one of my regular rants here about Google Translate, and even the best translation tools out there will translate some of these words incorrectly because they're not going to provide you the cultural and social context that we use them. Some of them are words that we're taught, and you're going to see an example that I was taught at an early age that you would never, ever use again in everyday Hebrew. There are some that actually mean something more nuanced that you're not going to get until a higher level, and I'm going to give that hack to you now. But it gives you the belief that Hebrew is a much more nuanced language than we give it credit, okay? Just because we don't have the millions of words that English vocabulary has does not mean Hebrew can't be precise and nuanced in what it's saying. So I'm going to give you some examples. Some of the most everyday verbs and everyday actions that we use are going to be in this list. As always, feel free to write down, screenshot however you would like, and you'll get a recording of this. So if you can't follow along as I'm writing, by all means, you'll be able to do so. Just 1 second, waiting for the screen to go back. Let's see if I can get it. Come on. Come on. What's this thing? Second, there it is. Okay, let me just move this out of the way. View, full screen. Okay, so as always, in providing you some vocab to go through today, the far right side is the Hebrew with the vowels. Again, we don't normally write with vowels, but many of you are at beginner's level, so you can follow along with those. Transliteration for American English is the column next to its left. And then because we're talking about actual more precise translations, you're going to see basic versus actual translation, right? Basic is what oftentimes we're taught to believe the word means, and actual is going to provide you with a little bit more nuance that I'm going to go through. Besides writing it out here, I'm going to explain a little bit more to you. Okay, so let's start with this first group of verbs because this is what we did last week. So it's also good review for all of you. There are no quizzes or tests here, but it's still good to have reviews so it sinks in a little bit more. Anyone who does Duolingo or any other language, formal language course will be able to tell that, to confirm that. So we did last week, when we did the command, we did several different verbs that when you translate them into English can mean go exclamation point. I want to take you through 4 verbs that in at least one major translation service will give one of the options as to go. Okay, we're only talking about infinitive verbs here, right? To do something. In this case, to go. So we have 4 verbs here I've written. Lalechet, linsoa, lazuz, and lahaziz. Let's focus on those first 2 verbs here, rows 2 and 3. Lalechet and linsoa. Lalechet and linsoa, let me make this clear and why this is a little bit more nuanced and complex than it sounds. You would not be wrong to translate both of these as to go. Okay, you would not be wrong. But if you were to translate it as to go, and then you were to provide that translation to someone else, a lot of context would be lost. Because when I see these 2 verbs in Hebrew, I know they're conveying something very different from one to another. Let's explain. Lalechet does mean to go, or to get out, right? When you say go exclamation point, it really means get out. But when you use the verb lalechet, you are saying that to go for a short distance, right? If I want to say in Hebrew, I'm going to the supermarket, I'm going to the grocery store, excuse me, ani holech lamakolet. I'm going to the grocery store. By using the verb lalechet, and I conjugate it there, so holech is present tense single masculine, so ani holech lamakolet. The moment I do that, I'm telling the listener or the reader, if I'm writing this out, that I'm going a short distance. And not only am I going a short distance, it's likely on foot. The verb lalechet is used in modern Hebrew to mean a short distance, and typically it's implied it's on foot, right? Because you're going a short distance, you're not going to turn on your car, you're not going to take a train. You're going a short distance to get to a certain destination, okay? So lalechet is only used for short distances, and if you want to say that you're going on foot somewhere, you're walking somewhere, anything like that is lalechet. The opposite of that in meaning is another verb that we often translate as to go, which is linsoa. Linsoa means to go, but it really means to travel. Because if I say, ani nosea lachaver sheli b'Yerushalayim, which is the correct way to say it, by the way, if I'm going to Jerusalem to see my friends, which in English I could say I'm going to Jerusalem to see my friend, right? In Hebrew, I would have to say linsoa, because I'm not going to walk on foot to Jerusalem. I live in Tel Aviv. I'm not walking all the way to Jerusalem. I'm going to take a car, I'm going to take a bus, I'm going to take a train. I'm going to take some means of transportation because it's a long distance. So using the verb linsoa as to go actually means to travel. And it actually means to go a long distance with the help of some vehicle, right? You're not going to say, ani nosea lamakolet. You're just not. Okay, even if you live in the smallest, most remote yishuv in Israel, you are not going to say ani nosea lemakolet. There's something that sounds wrong to the native Hebrew speaker when you say that. You could say ani olech lasupel, ani nosea lasupel. Supel is in a supermarket, and that's implying some big box supermarket in some highway junction. But a makolet is a grocery store. It's inherently a small thing. And there is no yishuv, there is no small community in Israel that doesn't have at least one grocery store. Okay, and that's in walking distance. So lalechet, just to review these two verbs. Lalechet means to go a short distance, usually on foot. Linsua means to go as in to travel, so it's a longer distance and it's with a vehicle as part of it. Okay, lalechet, linsua. These next two verbs not only sometimes are mistranslated as to go. Even when they're properly translated, you're not going to get the difference in English. So what do I mean? Lazuz and lehaziz. Remember rows 4 and 5 here, right? Lazuz and lehaziz, first off, you can already hear. You don't have to know anything about these verbs. You know they sound very similar. They both have that z, u, z sound, or they have a z long vowel in the middle and another z. Lazuz, lehaziz. Both of these verbs have the exact same shoresh, the exact same root of zayin, vav, zayin. And they actually mean to move. And again, you would not be incorrect to translate both of these into English as to move. But this is where Hebrew is actually much more specific and is much more enriched than English is. Because this is employing a tense of verbs that we no longer have in English, or we no longer use the term, and it's called the causative tense. What do I mean? I'm going to illustrate it right now. So if you're taking notes, wonderful, but you want to look at the screen for me to illustrate the difference between lazuz and lahaziz. Okay? Lazuz conjugated is zaz in the present tense. So if I want to say ani zaz, watch what I do. Ani zaz. Okay? Ani zaz. If I'm going to do lahaziz in present tense, watch what happens. Ani meziz et hamachshev sheli. Okay? Ani zaz. Ani meziz et hamachshev. Right? Both of these verbs mean to move, but they mean to move in a very different context from one to another. Lazuz is I move myself. It's implied I am moving myself. Ani zaz lamakom acher. I'm moving to another place. Okay? Ani maziz otcha. Or in this case, as I did before, ani maziz et hamachshev. I move the computer. Okay? So it's not just move, it's moving someone or something is lehaziz. And lazuz is simply to move oneself. Okay? Zazti hatzida, I moved to the side. Ani maziz et hamachshev. I move the computer. Okay, so lazuz is what we call the basic form of the verb in Hebrew. And lahaziz is the causative form. Lahaziz is a tense of verbs in Hebrew. Again, this is a little bit more advanced, so don't worry if you don't get all of this. Lahaziz is a tense that we call hif'il. Hif'il is known as a causative verb, meaning you're causing an action, typically the action that's in its basic tense, in this case, basic form lazuz, we're causing that to happen. So in this case, we're causing someone or something to move is lahaziz, okay? So to move oneself is lazuz, to move something or someone, lahaziz. Okay, again, the beauty of Hebrew, but lost in translation more often than not, okay? So those are 4 verbs that we often use as to go, to move, action in terms of direction, right? Let's go through some other of these verbs that can be translated with the same English word, but actually don't serve them justice by doing that. This next one was a request as part of last week's class. Is 3 verbs There's actually more verbs than this, but these are the three most used in everyday Hebrew that have to do with to see, right? Vision. Okay. The very first verb here, row 7, lirot, or lirot, if you can say the resh or not, is to see. This is the one that 100% means to see. Okay, so if you're saying, I see you, ani ro'eh otcha, or ani ro'eh otach, depending on the gender of whom you're seeing, right? To see someone, to see something, is lirot. That's the basic, and it's always followed by a direct object. Okay? That's actual to see. You will not be wrong if you translate that as to see. This next verb, you will be partially wrong if you translate it as to see, which is lehistakel. Lehistakel is to look at. It's much more to look at, or to look upon, but to look at, because we don't say to look upon in everyday English either, right? Lehistakel is to look at. So it's followed by el or al, but the point is this is not to see. I don't translate this as to see, even though it has something to do with vision. Just like in English, we have a difference between to see and to look at. Same thing in Hebrew. We have a verb that means to see, lirot, and a verb that means to look at, lehistakel. Okay, so tistaklu elai, look at me. Okay, that's the future tense. It's also one of the command forms of it. Tistaklu elai, atem, you all look at me, right? Versus atem ro'im oti, you all see me, right? Two different meanings. They have general similarities, right? But they're translated and they have different contexts. So to see, lirot, listakel, to look at, and then we have our third one, litzpot. If ever you were wondering how to properly say, I watch television in Hebrew, this is your friend. This is the proper verb to use when you are watching TV, watching a film, watching anything. If you were ever taught, and oftentimes I know for ease, like I talked about before, Ulpan teachers will teach ani ro'eh televizia. We'll use the verb to see for television because in English we say, I see something on television, right? Wrong. This is your verb, litzpot. Litzpot be. Ani sofe b'televizia. I'm watching TV. Okay, litzpot means to watch. And specifically to watch something like on TV or on your computer screen or on a large screen, okay? Lirot, lihistakel, litzpot. Again, you would be at least 50% correct in translating all of these as to see, because in English, right, we could translate and use all three of these verbs to mean to see, but in fact, they don't mean that. They mean to see, to look at, and to watch. Okay, so that nuance is really important in Hebrew, and it will help boost your vocabulary moving forward. Again, even if you're the most beginner of beginners, you now have a leg up that it took me, for example, I've been learning Hebrew since first or second grade. This is a major boost for someone who's just starting to learn Hebrew because you learn things that it took me years and years to finally figure out, and I was never formally taught. I had to learn this by breaking my teeth and making a lot of mistakes and being most of the time nicely corrected. Okay? So we've gone through to go and to see. The next one we went through last week, but it's good to have a review, is to stop. Now in Hebrew, this is a little different than the other two examples because the other two examples was about the translation is wrong. The translation is right. You just need to know the context in which these two verbs are used. So just like lazuz and lahaziz have grammatical context for everyday application, these have actual definitions that need to be applied in specific ways. La'atzor or la'atzor and lahafsik. Both of these are 100% correct in being translated as to stop, S-T-O-P, okay? But there's a major difference. La'atzor, row 11 here, la'atzor is to stop in place. If you are walking and someone says ta'atzol to a man, you stop where you are. If you see a stop sign in Hebrew, it's either going to say ha'et, which means slow down, or it's going to say atzol, stop where you are. Okay? La'atzol is to stop physically wherever you are. So if you are walking, if you are running, if you are jogging, and someone says to you, conjugates the verb la'atzol for you, you stop in place. The next verb, lahafsik, also means to stop, but it means to stop doing some sort of activity or an action. If you want to tell someone to stop smoking, this is the verb you're going to use. Tafsiku la'ashen means in a plural sense, in plural conjugated, stop smoking. Tafsiku ledaber, stop talking. Anything I need to tell someone to stop doing a specific action is lehafsik. If it's stop moving, stop in place, is la'atzol. Okay, so it's a very important distinction, because if you're telling someone, if you're, for example, when we can go next to restaurants and someone is smoking next to you indoors, and you know the law in Israel is you are not allowed to smoke indoors, and you want to say to them very impolitely, stop smoking, exclamation point, you now know to use the verb lafsik, tafsik or tafsiki lashen. If you were to use the other verb, they would look at you very oddly. They're going to look at you very oddly anyways, because you're commanding them to do something to a complete stranger. But tafsik lashen means actually stop smoking. Okay? The next one, I think we also went through last week, but is a very important one to go over again, because we use this one a lot in Hebrew, a lot, is latzet and la'azov. Both of these verbs, just like the last two examples, can mean to leave, L-E-A-V-E. And again, you would not be incorrect. You would be 100% correct to translate both of these as to leave. It just wouldn't be complete. Because these both translate as to leave on paper, but they mean more than that. Latzet, this verb to leave, right? Like Yetziat Mitzrayim, Exodus from Egypt. Latzet in modern Hebrew simply means to leave for an unspecified duration. Okay, if someone says, if I say to a friend, Ani yotze, I'm going out, or Ani yotze lahafsaka, I'm going out for a break. That there's no duration in that. If I say I'm going out, I have not specified for how long I'm going out. Not just because I didn't say anything after yotze, but also because yotze inherently implies there is no time duration on it. Ani yotze lahafsaka. I don't know if that break is 5 minutes. I don't know if it's 50 minutes. If I'm just saying, Ani yotze levintayim, I'm going out for in the meantime, again, I don't know how long it is. If I use the verb la'azov, however, that is, I'm leaving for good. Okay, you're not going to use la'azov to leave unless you're never coming back. So if you, for example, leave your job, you choose to leave your job. Ani ozev et avodah sheli. I'm leaving my work. Ani ozev et hatafkid. I'm leaving my position. If you if you break up with someone, and you want to be a little bit more blunt, and we have other nicer ways to say this in Hebrew, but if you want to say I'm leaving you, or the English version, I'm dumping you, that's this verb. Ani ozev otach, or ani ozev otcha. Okay? La'azov is to leave permanently. I'm never coming back. Whereas latzet is to leave, but you could be coming back in a minute, you could be coming back in an hour, you could be coming back in a year. Okay? Latzet and la'azov both mean to leave. It's just important to know when to use which. And then the last example I have here is a classic. I'm hoping that they no longer teach this in Ulpan, and I've heard from a few people that is no longer the case. So as I said, I've started learning Hebrew from a very early age. 3rd grade Hebrew school, I had a very good teacher. My parents loved her. She made us only speak in Hebrew. And she wrote all these sentence strips along the walls of Hebrew phrases you could use all during class, right? And one of them was, when you finished an assignment, to say that you finished and what else is there to do. And she wrote, this is about late 80s, early 90s, Gamarti Maish Lasot. If you were to say that in Israel today, if you were to say that in Israel in the late 80s, early 90s, you would be laughed at and embarrassed quite a lot. Because even though we're taught, I think no longer, that there are two verbs for to finish, lisayem and ligmol. And I was always taught ligmol meant to finish, and that's the verb you use. We do not use this verb in modern Hebrew, right? The only time you're going to use the verb ligmor, as you see written in the English, is for something that has nothing to do with everyday Hebrew, with everyday conversation. Perhaps it does. That's not any of our business, right? Both of these verbs are translated as to finish. Ligmor no longer means that. It's a result of another factor in what we're talking about, which is Israeli society, right? A language is used by a society to convey, to communicate. In the 70s, there was a series of films in Hebrew called Siltei Burekas, really Burekas films, like the pastry Burekas. And these were like teen, like the equivalent of American Pie in the 90s or Porky's in the 80s. Actually, Porky's was based on these films, right? They were crude, they were lewd, they were full of all sorts of innuendo. And one of the things that happened in the course of using of these films is that they used the verb ligmor to mean what it means today in everyday Hebrew, which is to have an orgasm. Okay, so it no longer means to finish like it did in the Hebrew I was learning in parallel in America. It means something different. If you want to say, I finished something, I completed something, it's always, 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 without a doubt, lisayem. Okay, ani siyamti et shiurei habayit sheli. I finished the homework. Ani siyamti et ha'targil. I finished the exercise. Ani asayem od me'at. I'm going to finish soon, very soon. Okay, if you want to say to finish, to complete anything else, to cease, it's lisayem. It is not ligmor. So if you have been taught ligmor, please get that out of your vocabulary now before you embarrass yourself. Okay, so this is all to say, and there are more examples, by the way. These are the ones that you'll encounter the most because they're everyday actions that we use quite a lot to describe what we're doing or what someone else is doing. But these, and there are more examples, both of verbs as well as nouns and adjectives. I'm not getting into all that. I want to take these to not only improve your vocabulary, because these are all great words, but also to show you that there is nuance in the Hebrew that you may or may not be learning elsewhere. So if your teacher tells you, maybe because they don't have good enough English, maybe because they don't think they for more complex vocabulary, you already, by virtue of speaking English, have a very complex vocabulary. Okay, so don't let up on your teachers who will simply tell you that lalechet and ninsoa mean to go. Because I've just shown you that they do not mean to go. One means to go in one context, one means to go in a different context. Same with all these other verbs. You need to know if there's any specific things for it, because Hebrew is a conservative language. We don't have superfluous words. We don't have extra words that don't have their own meaning and their own context into how we use them. Okay. See, we had a bunch of questions, so I'm going to get to those as I'm doing. If you have any questions in the meantime, we have, please write them in the chat window. I'm going to try to get to as many of them right now as possible as I see. Great. So starting at the top of the chat, we have some great questions here. Yechezkel asks, can't you use lalechet as a quasi-future tense? For example, I'm going to tell him soon. Yes, you can say in everyday Hebrew, it's not high-level Hebrew, it's everyday Hebrew, just like everyday English is not high-level English. Ani olech lagid lo mashu. I'm going to tell him something. Okay? Ani holech le. I'm going to do something. You can use that in the way that we use that in English. Okay, that's actually, it's probably more a function of influence of other languages on Hebrew, as in I'm going to do something, just like we have in other languages as well. Spanish, I know we have that for sure. You can say that in Hebrew and it's completely fine. But if you're saying I'm going to the store, you're only going to use lalechet. You're not going to use linsoa. That's what we're talking about here. For a short drive to the makolet, would you say holech? Again, usually when you get in a car, you're going to use linsoa. That's just that linsoa means to travel. It's more accurate to say to travel than to go. So if you are just going to the store and you happen to need the car to do that, you can still use either of them. Just understand that if you say ani nosea lemakolet, people may look at you like, how far away is that makolet that you need to linsoa? Okay? Just understand, again, it's more about the context of these two verbs. So if you're going to say ani nosea lemakolet, recognize you may get some odd looks from people who live in very close-knit neighborhoods. But a great question, Gilshon. Dov, sometimes it is. I don't want to get into that again because I don't want to get into the binyanim with a lot of beginner students here. But in this case, lazuz simply means I move. Lazuz is in a tense that is the most basic form of that shoresh, of that root. In this case, to move. So ani zaz, I move. It's already implied in the context of that verb. I'm moving myself. I can further emphasize that, but I don't need to. Again, question that is a little bit more advanced here. So if this intimidates you, look away or hold your ears for the second. Each binyan has nikudot specific to it. What is hif il? There is no hif al. It's hif il. And hif il, the name of each of these binyan give you the past tense, third person masculine of it. So hif il heziz. Hif il hedlik. Hif il hechnis. Okay? I'm not going to go through all that. If any of you need help with verb conjugations, I'm going to write in the chat before. I've shared with you a great resource online before. It's called Perlin.com. It's also an app. It's a great website. You can put in any verb and it will give you the full conjugation, right? So we don't need to sit here and conjugate together. You can just look it up your own anytime you want. It's the online version of that classic 501 Hebrew verbs. Okay. Gilshon asks a great question. How about just looking in response to a sales clerk approach? Sales clerk coming up and asking, in Hebrew, it's a great point, right? When you're in a store, a sales clerk, if they're going to ask you and engage you in anything, some stores do, many stores don't, they're going to ask you one or two things. The equivalent of, are you looking for something? Mechapes mashu. Mechapes to a man, mechapeset to a woman. Or they're going to say mistader to a man or mistaderet to a woman. The histader means, are you sorted? We don't have that in American English. In British English, it works. Are you sorted out? Are you all good? Are you taken care of? Okay, they're going to say one of those to you. The answer to mistader or mistaderet is ken or lo. I am sorted, which means could either mean I really am, or please, I don't need your help. You can just say ken. If you say lo, you're implying you need some help and you need to follow it up with something. If they ask you mechapes or mechapeset mashu, and you just want to say, I'm just looking, you can say, ani rak mistakel. Okay, I'm just looking at. Right? We said listakel is to look at, ani mistakel. If you say ani mechapes, mechapes means to search. So you're looking for something. That's different. Then you're asking for help. Okay? But if I'm just looking, ani stam mistakel, I'm just looking around. Okay? Same with Michelle. Great question to ask that. Let's see what other questions is. JS, I explained that. It is not listakel, it is not lirot, ani tzofe batelevizia. Only verb that's acceptable. But important to know because I know a lot of Hebrew teachers do not teach that correctly at the very first part because they just want to quickly have you say, I'm watching television, right? Ani tzofe batelevizia. Shane, I'm watching children play. It depends in what context, because I'm watching children play. If there's a context of like watching over the children, that's an entirely different verb. If I'm just looking at them, that's, you could use either. And again, it depends the context. I'm looking at the children playing or I'm seeing the children playing. What is your relation to the children playing? It'll influence what verb you pick. I would say, yeah, again, I would need more context for that. Marlene asks, does the verb la'avor have the same meaning of to move? That's another great example. La'avor can mean to move, but it's not the exact, it's not always used in the exact same context. La'avor is a very complex verb. Maybe we'll spend a whole class just on that one verb because it has so many different applications. But physically moving is zaz, as in a body or a specific object. Not moving apartments and not moving positions, not moving anything else, just simply yourself or one specific object is lazuz and lahaziz. Nechama asks, how would I say, look at your hand? So again, the histakel is more properly translated as to look at. So that can be to look at anything. That could be to look at a painting. That could be to look at your hand. So anytime you want to say in English to look at, it's lihistakel in Hebrew. 99% of the time, you're going to be right with that. Okay? Gershon, in the store they asked, banano igmero is the use of gmal beneath proper Hebrew. Okay, great question. We've talked about this before, and it's a really good reminder, especially as we're talking about nuance in language. In English, we're taught that the passive voice is not good English. In Hebrew, the passive is actually really good Hebrew. It's considered higher level Hebrew to use the passive. Again, pe'alim.com, if you don't know what the passive tense is of a verb, it will help you out with that. So I'm not going to get into that now. Best to look at that website at your own leisure, and it's great. But just know that the passive form, and in Hebrew we have three different tenses, three different forms of the passive tense based on what the active version of it is. Passive is very good Hebrew and is considered very good Hebrew. So if someone uses the passive to you, hats off to them, same to you. If you use the passive, it's a very good level of Hebrew. It's not considered bad like it is in English, even though I think that's also a bit integrated in English. Yes, okay, so as everyone is saying, in stores they ran out if they said nigmar. That's fine, okay? That's fine if they say something is finished, as in a product is finished, not as in someone is nigmar, okay? That's the difference here. We do not willingly use, none of you will willingly use the verb nigmor in a sentence. Just making that abundantly clear for your own pride, okay? If someone else uses it, chances are they're talking about the stock, the quantity of a product, and you do say that in Hebrew. There's an even more appropriate word that is not ligmor, it's azal. So you've probably seen this a lot. If, for example, you go on a website and they're out of stock of a product, the proper Hebrew will say the proper, it will say Azal Hamlai or Azal Bamlai, Aleph Zain Lamed. So I'm looking right now at IKEA, which is also known as IKEA's website. And if they don't have something, it says Azal. That in proper Hebrew means we're out of it, we're out of stock. It's the same thing as meaning nigmal, which literally just means finished. But in proper Hebrew, if I'm going to say there's nothing left of that, quantity-wise, it's azal. You'll see that a lot. Akaltisim azlu. The ticket sold out. Okay, Aleph, Zain, Lamed, azal. Okay. All right, what other things? Yes, like I said, JS asked about the verb ligmol. Ligmol changed its meaning in everyday Hebrew in the 70s, right? So if you grew up in Israel in the 70s, within a varying generation, after which you no longer use ligmol to mean to finish. If you're older, like a 97 or 98-year-old is, chances are you'll still use it. But lisayem is the proper verb to use to say to finish. Okay. Dina or Dinah, depending on how you pronounce your name, like I said, pealim.com will give you the full conjugation of litzvot. Okay. So Sharna, Sharna asks a great question. In most of the USA, we always go by car to the supermarket, even if it's only 1 mile away. So what would we say? We're talking about Hebrew being used in Israel. So that's not applicable. Okay, you will sometimes go in your car to a supermarket, but we're talking about a big supermarket, and there aren't that many of those in Israel. There are. But in that case, ani nosea lesupel. In that case, it's not a makolet. A makolet is a grocery store. A supel is a supermarket, right? Just like we have the difference in English between grocery store and a supermarket. A supermarket is usually, not usually, it's always bigger than a grocery store. So if ani nosea lesupel makes complete sense. If you live in the center of the country, you have a car, you go to one of the big ones by one of the highway junctions here in Israel, that makes sense. Ani nosea lemakolet does not make sense in modern Hebrew in Israel because you don't have to go a far distance anywhere in Israel to find a makolet, a grocery store. You might have to go a far distance to find a supel, but not a makolet. Okay. Sherry asks, what if we go on a bicycle? Great question. We didn't cover that here. There are other verbs that we didn't include here that have to do with specific forms of travel. That wasn't what we were doing here. I'm happy to do that in a future class when we talk about just focusing on travel, because God willing, we can all do that soon. But you would not use either of these verbs for a bicycle. The verb you're going to use is lilkov. I'll write that in the chat here. That is to ride a bike. All right, just like in English, we use a different verb. You can say, I go by bike, but in proper English, we say, I ride my bike, right? This is the verb for to ride a bike. This is not the same ride as in a car. This is only for a bike or one of those obnoxious electric scooters. Sorry, not sorry if you have one of those, by the way. I can't stand those. Okay. Great question. Shane, if the children are in the park and I'm watching them play, what would be the correct verb? I'm not babysitting, taking care of them. Just to see. I see the children playing, right? Because see, if you're just saying I see something, you're observing it. You have no necessarily connection to what you're doing with that observation, but you're going to use ani ro'eh. I see the children playing, like you would say in English. Okay, Millie asks a question not related to this yet, so I'll come back to you. Nechama, so would it be tistakel al hayad was asking a dance student to look at their hand. Assuming you're just asking them to look at your hand, then yes. If you want to say something a little bit more specific, like focus on your hand, concentrate on your hand, just like in English, that's a different verb. But if you're just saying to someone, look at your hand, yes. If you want to say, see your hand, which we often say in Hebrew, you can also say, but I think you mean tistakel alayad, look at your hand. Or for a plural, tistaklu alayad, look at your hand. Okay? Naomi or Nomi asks the difference between doeg and choshesh. That's another great two verbs that I didn't get into, but let me write them in Hebrew just so people can see that. Lidog. Sorry, I'm writing this in the chat window. Lidog, the first one means to worry. Lachshosh is to fear. Okay, we could translate these both in English as to worry, but again, English is a rich language, so is Hebrew. Let's expand our vocabulary. Lidog is to worry. Lachshosh is to fear. Okay. Again, Shona, that may be the case, but we're talking about for Cafe Oleh using Hebrew in Israel. So what happens in America, that could be it. But again, supermarkets, you either are in the city in which they're in, or you do have to travel by car to get to. But important point, if you're not living in Israel. Does lehistakel ever take ba? No. Very rarely, if any. In modern Hebrew, it'll take el or al, as I wrote up here in row 8 and 9. Listakel al, to look upon or to look at. Okay? Great question. All right. And then any other questions about the verbs before I get to non-related questions? Okay. All right. Racheli asks, how do you say to look inside or something? Inside of something, do you mean? To look inside of something. You would use, let's see. Can you give me an example? Can you give me a sentence in English? No, that would actually help, or context. Okay, I'll come back to you, Racheli, as you're typing. Just want to get to this other question that Miri asks. In our shops in Yafo, I often hear people saying yalla bye or yalla litrot when they leave. Are you supposed to know someone well? When you add the yalla, when do you add yalla, and when is it inappropriate? Yalla, okay. Different topic altogether before we get to Racheli's question. Yalla is Arabic, first off. Okay, just like a lot of slang in Hebrew is not Hebrew, it comes from Arabic. Yalla is Arabic, and it means many, many, many different things depending on how you say it and when you're using it. But usually, yalla means let's go. It can mean that's it. It can mean all sorts of different things. In the context of leaving a store, you are saying bye to the shopkeeper. You can just say bye or lihitraot. To say yalla bye or yalla lihitraot is a little bit more familiar. I would not use yalla unless I'm either, friendly with someone, or that person has gone out of their way to be friendly with me, and I'm reciprocating. But I would not use yalla with a complete stranger. I particularly would not use yalla in Yafo, which is a predominantly Arab population, because it could be seen as I'm practicing what little Arabic I have. And that could be seen as a little insulting. If people are saying yalla to each other, it usually means that they already know each other, or that the shopkeeper is being very chummy with everyone, and that's considered it, okay? So another important context here, I would not go to, for example, H&M. H&M in Israel is notorious for never asking you if you need help. They will walk around the store, but they will never ask you for help. When I'm at the cashier, same thing. When I'm saying bye or thank you and goodbye, I would never use yalla there because there's no friendly, familiar banter taking place that would necessitate that. Okay, yalla is already, when it's used in the context of saying goodbye to someone, is only used among friends or familiar people. But important question in terms of context. Okay. Racheli, I'm looking inside the bottle. Let's get back to your question. I'm looking, ani mistakel betoch or letoch habakbuk. I'm looking at, again, that verb to look. It's to look at, but I'm looking inside. Anytime it's look, chances are it's going to be lehistakel. So in this case, ani mistakel betoch letoch habakbuk. Ani mistakel, Lorraine asks about, I look inside a room. Lehistakel again. Okay? Leah, the how do you say help me is in the recording from last week, but it's Hatzilu. Okay? Hatzilu, Hey, Sadi, Yud, Lamed, Vav. It's recorded in last week's session. Ali can get that to you if you don't have the link for it. Michael or Michael, how do I say I'm completely okay? We talked about that before here in the chat. It's Mistadel. Let me just write that again here so that everyone sees it with transliteration. Mistadel. Okay. Okay, Mistadel, Ani Mistadel, I'm okay. Female, Mistaderet. Okay, Mistadel, Mistaderet. Okay, that's your catch-all for I'm doing all right. I'm sorted out. I'm sorted. Yes, David says, I believe there are 3 different ways of saying to hear. Yes, like I said, there are many more of these examples. I only want to focus on some of these, but yes, there are more that have to do with hearing, that have to do with all sorts of other actions. So I just want to use a couple examples for you to see that they're what synonyms really aren't synonyms in Hebrew. Okay. Okay. Bernard, do you know a good source for the prepositions used with a verb? For example, I just checked Palim.com, which says that listakel bit with no other suggestions are also useless. 501 Hebrew verbs, the big book. A dictionary that has sample sentences there's one called Rav Milon. There's a couple of those. Any of them that have sample sentences so you can see how the verb is actually used will be good for that, but that's a great question. But yes, Google Translate is the worst of all, without a doubt. Okay, Miri asks, how about going through every verb you need for every form of travel and every verb for putting on every item of clothing, so we have it in one place? I'm happy to do that in the context like we're talking about now, about nuance, not to just give you all one other sheet of vocabulary that you can look up, but is just understanding the difference in some of these, the subtle difference between some of these verbs. I'm happy to do that in a future class. It's a great suggestion. Okay. Any last questions, whether it's about the verbs we went through today, anything else? Steve asks, I'm completely okay. Yes, besedo gamur means completely all right. Okay. JS, recycling is not a big deal in Israel, I'm sorry to say. So the word for to recycle is lemachzel, and that's about all you need to know. I'm happy to write that in the chat window, but in terms of anything more than that, it really doesn't exist in Israel right now. So lemachzel means to recycle. Any last questions? Susan, we've done these quite a lot in the last few sessions. Ali, again, gave the link to previous ones. We've gone through vaccination a lot. I really would like to focus on other parts of our lives because, you know, I would like to get through this, but maybe in another month or so, we'll go through those, but we have covered that in the past. Okay. All right. We're just at the top of the hour. Again, thank you all for joining. If you have any specific requests for topics for us to go over, please email Ali. We'll be happy to include them in upcoming classes, as well as I highly encourage you all to sign up for the Ulpan La'inyan conversation classes. It's really important that you also get a chance to practice speaking. It's just that we have a lot of people on this call. It's very hard to conduct it, especially with different levels. But there's a beginners and intermediate class. It's really good for everyone to practice what you're learning here and learning in general. So with that, toda rabba lachem. Thank you very much.
Jay, toda lacha.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
You
you.
will all get this recording tomorrow, so no need to send me an email. You're all on the list, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, guys.
תודה רבה.
Thank you so much.
Toda.